Guru Nation. We have Dan O'Tap on the show, part 2. If you count SOS Conference, part 3. You were on the panel with me, the last panel, right? Where we did the wants and needs board.
Yeah.
Everybody came to you with their wants and their needs.
And
Did
needs.
you have any needs? I never asked you what you want. Last show we talked about what sites want.
Yeah.
What do you actually want as a individual in research, within a research context, and as a ClinOps leader at a big pharma company, right?
Yeah.
A director at a big pharma, Genentech. His LinkedIn profile is underneath, by the way.
Thank you. I mean, for one, it's good to see you again, as always.
Yes. What
And
does that sign say? Clear eyes, full. I've been meaning to ask you. What?
is it this
Full?
one, or where is it? Clear eyes,
Clear.
full hearts. If you've ever seen Friday Night Lights, it was a gift of one of my teams. It's a very near and
Okay.
dear gift and memento. So,
Well, it's a very cool background too for Zoom calls and podcasts.
Yeah, the question of what do I want? That's a really good question.
Yeah, what do you want, man? What do you want?
Boy, it's 7 a.m. on a Thursday. I didn't plan on that. So twofold. Let's go twofold. Let's actually just be transparent, because at this point I feel like we are connected on a level that I foresee us being connected for the
we don't just share a name and former state.
Yeah. And then interest in clinical research.
Yes.
Professionally, what do I want? I really want to be part of an effort overarchingly that works on all of these kind of pain in the tail nuances of working in our industry: sponsor, CRO, third-party vendor, site, trying to figure out how that whole communication pathway as interconnected and as complicated, but also as simplistic as it is, being involved in trying to figure out how to make that better. Like, that's honestly what I want. I want to figure out how to continually business process improve, listen to stakeholders. I have a different kind of viewpoint coming from having various positions. Some on the site side, now on the sponsor side, where I know that as a sponsor, I view our investigators and our investigative sites as business partners. And certain things for me that are just standard practice in business is like very complicated in our world, and I don't understand why. So me being a simple kind of minded individual, I want to be part of figuring out how to kind of continue to break that down. So in a nutshell, I want to continue to do what I've been doing genuinely. I really enjoy what my job is at Genentech.
Yeah.
And I couldn't ask for anything better. And as long as I'm continually working in clinical trials professionally and connecting with sites, investigators, and site staff that are performing those trials and conducting those trials, I'm going to be a happy camper.
Now,
professionally, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, now the hard part comes, and you don't speak for your employer, so I'm gonna ask just in general about pharma or sponsors. Is that congruent with what sponsors want? What most sponsors want?
Yeah. So good point. And I'm speaking on behalf of myself, not any company or entity. Honestly, I think that what sponsors should and hopefully are looking for, not only in their site selection partners, but the vendors and then the CROs that they're partnering with to execute these trials. I think affable business practice will always be conducive to better outcomes. But I think ultimately what we're looking for are sites that produce, take their job seriously. When we select them as a site, we're hoping that they can prioritize, and that the feasibility process that's been vetted that indicates they have the right and proper resource, that the site's actually going to give that study that proper resource. And then basically conduct the trial according to the protocol and enter the data. And that's what we're looking for. We want good quality sites and quality data. It's easier, and it makes a lot of business sense to work with people that you can kind of vibe with, right? So you kind of get a feel of that. But I mean, at the end of the day, business is business. If the site's producing and they're entering the data, we're happy. I think what we're hoping to find as sponsors would be partners that are not just for one trial that we have. And that's kind of the problem sometimes, at least that I see with non-oncology pipelines, because there could be a bolus of activity in one indication for a little bit of time, and then it doesn't have a new study for a couple of years, and you're like, oh, okay, I got to go back to my IBD group and figure out if we still have information. So it's a little bit hard, But the reason I'm bringing this up is overall, I do feel like sponsors would be interested in having partners in sites and investigators that it's not a matter of going back because you're part of the golf club or you're part of the group that we just work with. It's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is as you have sites that perform clinical trial activity and prove their validity and commitment and expertise, that should compound and build on it. And to me, ultimately, it's being very attentive to the project management of that trial at their site, communication being very clear. Like if you need something, you got to let us know. And especially from a sponsor perspective, if you're communicating your needs and you're not being heard, or you feel like you're not having enough follow-up from another party, reach out to the sponsor directly, because it's some
Oh man,
I
I
would tell you,
wish.
I would tell you there are opportunities. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that one group is any better than the other, but what I will say is there are moments in time where we may not be aware of something that is taking place. And once we become aware, our project managers would then in turn follow up accordingly. And it's that's why I'm saying in theory, the communication of clinical trials and the inner dynamics is really straightforward. It's kind of like 1 + 1 is 2, Dan. You're not complicating this, but it is kind of complicated because there are a myriad of
Yes.
layers of oversight. And I am a firm believer, I'm genuinely a firm believer that nobody walks in the door of their job wanting to do a bad job. So we see examples in business processes that we could dive into at later times, but that clearly have, let's just be politically correct and say, opportunities for improvement, right? But
Yes.
I'm not a big believer in, oh, it's because this individual or this one group or this one company is X, Y, or Z. Like it's that they're the problem. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to find the benefits and find where we can change, but I'm not witch hunting in any way when I say that, involve the sponsor if you're not being listened to. Like it's such I don't ever want to come across like I'm trying to throw any other group under the bus, because that's not the case. And what I would say though is there is some just realistic understanding of, if you have a problem on a trial and you're kind of 2 steps removed from the
Yep.
sponsor of that study, it behooves you to get connected with the sponsor. I don't know how I got on that dovetail. Sorry.
No, it's resonates with me right now.
Okay.
So there's a study, a large pharma that, and we're very selective about the studies that we take.
Mhm.
So we're not anymore. We talked about it beforehand. When you're a new site, you got to take what you can get, but we're at the
Yeah.
point now where we can be selective. And first we look like what matches for our patients, right? If this is good for our patients, we're gonna make the budget work no matter what. Most of the time sponsors are reasonable enough when it comes to budgets. I feel if you know how to negotiate
Mhm.
properly, and this is where you might need help from a company like mine and Chris, although it's not a shameless plug, but it is. Message me if you're interested. I'm in a study right now, a very well paying study, but they were sticklers from the beginning. You're only going to get paid 3 screen failures,
Mm.
and that's it. And we're like, okay, that's fine. The study
Yeah.
pays well enough to subsidize the others, right?
Mhm.
No problem. We're doing very well on this study. We're getting close to being a high enroller. We're scaling it back because we don't necessarily want the attention that comes with.
Yeah.
We're still new. I don't need that. I'd rather focus on another study right now. Well, turns out we had about 15 screen failures, and nobody anticipated we'd have that many.
Yeah.
We also have like uh, 15 or 20 randomized. So about half,
Yeah.
which they expected much less. And we're turns out we're like right within the bell curve. Like we're not
Yeah.
outliers.
Yeah.
I had a simple request. I mean, we've been doing good. Our monitor even said, "You guys are one of
Yeah.
the monitor said you guys are my best enrolling site.
Mhm.
You're trending towards high enroller for the whole study. You've really turned the corner on data entry and things like that. There's no serious deviation, all that stuff you want to hear." I went back and said, "Listen, can we get
Yeah.
a
Compensated.
few more screen fills?" There's first of all no one to talk to. It's our monitor. The monitor forwards it to some box,
Yep.
black box.
Yeah.
Some input output gets back to him. and it comes to you. Once in a while, someone behind the curtain asks you for rationale. Okay, I'll do it. Boom.
Yeah.
And in like a day, I gave them rationale.
Yeah, of course.
That was over 6 weeks ago. Nothing. But all I've heard since was, hey, site, I know these are screen failures, but you have to enter like full data in the EDs. Like there is a lot of detailed stuff
Yeah.
in the
Oh,
EDs. The way I look at it, I'm about to go back and say, well, what's going on with this? Not to mention, we're pulling their diversity numbers. Like
mhm,
there's not other sites really able to do this.
mhm.
They've even stopped. I don't know if you're allowed to do this. This is another podcast. They've stopped, they were short on minorities, so they don't allow Caucasians screened anymore. But the
Yeah.
way they communicated this was if your site doesn't have a Hispanic or African American, the IRT will disable you from screening. And study wide,
Wow.
I replied back, we have a Native American about to be randomized. This is okay. And they said, oh, yeah, of course. What we meant was Caucasian. So there's a lot going on with this sponsor.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? Because obviously I don't want to say don't care, but they definitely don't know how to communicate well, in my opinion. And it seems like a bit of a mess, even though I'm not really complaining. It's a good paying study. But if I had a complaint, especially after what you just said, if I feel like they could use some help on their end.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think we are in very interesting and uncharted waters with, at least in the US, how our health authority is going to be looking at data coming in the door to look at any kind of registration or any kind of new submission. And by that happening, I think there's a lot of work that's being done on a sponsor side, on a consulting side, and otherwise to try to anticipate what the new norm looks like, and all these, guidance documents being released. There's an air of energy of uncertainty, which then creates some decision-making nuances that may or may not be correct in that moment in time. So that's my response to what my thought is with that, because interestingly enough, flip it on its head. I have heard examples anecdotally where a company needed to meet a quota of a specific minority, and once they did, they said, we're good. We don't need to enroll any more individuals in this population, which is kind of what you said in an inverse way, because it's I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but it's fascinating because I don't know about you, but I genuinely think of studying a disease in regard to what's its actual epidata look like, as far as what's the patient population. And if I know that this disease has a prevalence of 21% in Asian American or Pacific Islander, then if we're doing a good job, the science speaks to that. I'm hopefully, in the very least, the pool of my patients are going to be 21% representative of that population. Does that make sense? And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter where we get the patients,
Yep.
as long as that general pool. But the thing is it's probably way more complicated than that. I have folks at my company that are genuinely brilliant minded individuals leading efforts like diversity, health equity, and population science, et cetera, coming out of Genentech, which could spin like you need to get them on your podcast. So there's a lot more science that goes into this, and there's a lot more nuance. But to talk to your point about hearing from a sponsor, oh, we've reached this, and it's not, I don't know if I didn't see the announcement. It's not like they came out with a quota saying, well, we reached our quota for whites, we're going to close enrollment here.
Yeah,
Like,
no. No.
I get it wasn't that extreme or kind of like fringe approach, but what I'm saying, uncharted territory that the FDA is doing a heck of a job trying to clarify, which I do give credit to where credit's due there. Because there's some teeth behind this kind of inclusive research work happening on the FDA level, right? Accelerated approvals coming back saying you don't have enough African American populations. This multiple myeloma indication represents that. Go back, get more patients. So you're seeing, it's not like the examples where if you don't post on ct.gov effectively, you're going to get fined 50K or something each day.
Right.
Like, I don't know about you, I haven't seen a lot of civil cases to that effect. Mind you, there are some nuances. But to this point, I raise that as an example, saying from an FDA diversity lens, this is unprecedented. Seeing the amount of kind of effort behind truly making this a reality of the scientific leadership from a health authority saying enough is enough. You give us the patient population in our country. you break down the demographics of that and the epi data, and you need to hit the mark here, and that's it. And it's almost like so simplistic that I'm confused by how people are confusing this. Because then they're like, well, does the site do the DAP plan or does the sponsor do this? And it's like, man alive, guys, who's on first? But that's a long-winded response to your simple question of, have I seen it? Yes, anecdotally, I've heard about it. How do I respond to it? I think it's well intentioned under the guise of trying to follow the new authority and rules. However, I think it's misguided in its overall intent
Approach.
of, human subjects research. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I think it's
indiscriminate. Yeah.
I agree. So the sponsor should have thought this through better as far as like my site. I want to say we've probably half of the ones we randomized were Hispanic or minorities, and the other
Mhm.
half were not. So I feel like we're being penalized by not being allowed. Like if we happen to find a
I know.
qualified candidate that's Caucasian,
I know.
we're kind of subsidizing a lot of the study because
I
they're
mean, think
not.
about the ethical. If this is a,
I've had to tell patients we can't enroll you because you're white.
I mean, that's a
I have
whole,
to tell patients that.
yeah, that's a whole, I mean, again, people much smarter than me on this topic. That would be a fascinating discussion on where does this,
If they want to keep it real, do you know what the white people tell me when I tell them that? Well, I do have like
I know,
10%
I
of
know. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I have like 1 or 2% Native American population, Mohawk Indian, or something coming out of the
yeah, and
Adirondack.
then they'll
Pretty.
say just put me as that.
Hmm.
And I'm sure some sites are doing it because there's no way to police that.
I know, but
But you have
that's an
morals,
adventure
like
in missing the point, though. You know what I mean?
yes,
Like, and
yes.
that's what I think you're trying with what you're bringing up to me is, and what's it gets.
Well, here's the thing I think, all right? I agree with everything you said. This is unprecedented times, uncharted waters. Doesn't help that the sponsor's
No,
European,
now,
and they're
mind you,
kind
by the way,
of
I don't mean to cut you off. What I do want to say is the topics of like underrepresented minorities in clinical trials is, I don't mean that's new, like, oh my gosh, we're just learning about it. So it's a long ongoing, but the nuance that I wanted to point out that is uncharted or new is like creating these diversity action plans and things like that.
hmm
So
hmm
yeah, at the risk of sounding completely ignorant early in the morning on a Thursday,
No, no,
that's
no.
what
Everyone gets it. Like
yeah.
everyone that's doing studies right now is dealing with this. Maybe not as extreme as this example, but
Mhm.
it's gonna happen. The sponsor's European, so they're kind of tone deaf to UN
Yeah.
culture. Here's what I think. Benjamin Franklin said, "You shouldn't appeal to reason, you should appeal to incentives."
Hmm.
I actually think the sponsors are very smart people. They're not stupid. And they're like behind the scenes, no, we want to give them incentive to only screen minorities and not screen fail people. It went into a black box somewhere and it's not getting responded to, and they're making it worse on you, more labor intensive to have a screen failure, so they're penalizing you even
Yeah.
more. It's not just a free screen fail, it's you're losing money on a screen fail now. I think they want that incentive, even though I feel like as soon as we get another study, I'm focusing efforts on that. I
Hmm.
don't think they want to push that far with their incentives. That's an
Hmm.
unintended consequence
Yeah.
that they have not planned for because they think this is the only study I have.
Yeah.
It's reality, guys. Wake up. We need to talk about this stuff more because someone should have responded to my request for screen fails. Like, I'm not being unreasonable. We had like 15. We got paid for three, which we didn't get paid for, but in theory we will. All
Yeah.
I asked for was three more. I didn't ask for like all of them. And for that to not have been even responded to in like
Yeah.
6 weeks, plus all this other stuff,
Hmm.
shows me either there's this is like a huge organization that's got a lot of moving parts, or they don't care. Like they just rather I don't screen unless I find like the perfect candidate and non-Caucasian. So
Wow. I mean, it sounds like it's an interesting situation that you have, and I'd be interested if there's really there's got to be a way of connecting to the sponsor. I know, in addition to a
yeah,
black box, you know what I mean? Like
and the
there's,
CRA's been very helpful, but
it sounds
honestly,
like
this
it.
is
Yeah.
beyond their pay grade. It's not.
Hmm.
And after all this being said, I'd probably do another study with this sponsor again. They pay really well. the drug's actually good for the
Mm,
patients,
yeah.
but I would definitely push a lot harder on that screen fail thing
It's
this time around.
fascinating that seems like such a common occurrence. And this is where I, not being in a clinical operations like team execution lens, like I'm not a clinical trial lead or program director of like a molecule, but the topic that I hear a lot from sites, especially non-onc sites, are the concept of like capping screen fail rates. And it's fascinating to me because it's like a non-starter sometimes for you guys that you run into, which to me, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't want to make assumptions, but to me, I don't understand. What that speaks to me is that you're automatically out of the gate thinking that a site's going to try to game the system and just
Yeah,
do a bunch of screen fails and get paid money for it and just call it a day. Like, I don't think that that's the intent, but that is the messaging somehow behind that in a way.
yeah.
So it's fascinating to me. And again, I'm ignorant of. I'm sure that there are budgeting constraints where there's a certain amount or money that's allocated from a project level, saying yes, we know that this is going to be basically attrition. Like it could be, but it
Yeah.
seems like super common that sites are struggling with a screen fail. One, lack of payment in any way, shape, or form, which is hard to understand because there is activity performed. By the way, if you're being asked to enter data on that, that's even more
Oh,
credence to be like, yeah,
extensive. It's
there's
not
no
just
such thing
data.
as a,
It's extensive data, more
yeah.
than other studies by far.
So that would even justify, like, that's fine. This isn't even a screen fail rate. This is just a common data entry request that we're going to invoice you on. Like, that's how I would just be like,
Okay.
you're not even, if you're requiring me to enter data, you're requiring me to do work. Screen fail would have been captured without this information. I'm just thinking out loud, Dan. But
Mm.
anyway, it's fascinating that that's still a topic that seems to be a struggle. Case in point that you and I are talking about this morning. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of caveats. I'm sure the sponsor thought this through because now that we're talking, looking back when the study started, they offered a pre-screening study, like
Okay.
which I turned down because we were too busy with other stuff.
Yeah.
And that probably could have paid for some of the screen fails, I think, or
Mm,
eliminated.
mm.
But they should have like explained that to us better. Like, hey,
I
you're
don't know.
gonna
It
get
sounds brilliant, but
into
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think they thought it through, and now they're like, well, no, appeal to their incentive, and we're not gonna
Mm,
do that. I'd rather they don't screen than they bring more screen fails. So
yeah.
fair enough, lesson learned. Do you think, well, this is uncharted territory when it comes to like the diversity action plans?
And how that's affecting sponsors having to kind of monitor real-time enrollment as they're coming in. Because say if you have a watershed or hockey stick, enrollment of a specific minority or just
Yeah,
general population,
yeah,
I'm sure that they're sitting there struggling with what do we do here? Because if we've opened the gate and then it comes back to if somebody really wants to put the onus on the sponsor, they would say, well, part of your responsibility is select sites that are going to get the enrollment that you need. So
ah,
guess what? That falls still on you, Dan. Like if
yeah,
you didn't realize that you were going to have such a bolus of Caucasian enrollment, did you do your homework? And so, but it's still, I can see where a sponsor would be struggling, especially with any kind of registrational data with the demographics coming in and they're trying to realize, oh no, if we don't intervene somehow, we're going to cap that 60 patient enrollment and we're not going to have the diversity that we need. What do we do? So that's actually what's kind of an interesting ethical discussion right now because what's
yeah,
drug development in and of itself is business. So you need to have a strategy. And if your strategy needs to be adjusted, but then you have these implications of healthcare also in the midst of this, which people can ethically take that thread and pull really fast. It's very interesting to start uncoupling these discussions to go now in that setting, Dan, it might make sense that somebody would tell you we can't, but it's all a matter of the framing, right? And that's where I'm saying the ethics behind this becomes in question because maybe somebody who's much smarter in this level can speak to this because there's still a business ask that a sponsor is trying to, yes, we're exploring new medications, but in the context of a very structured strategy. And if we know that we're going to get rejected if we don't have X, Y, and Z prospectively included in our trial, and we're monitoring that in real time. Is it ethical to say, like, okay, we're done. We've capped our white enrollment,
Yeah.
and now we need to strategically focus. Some would say that's doing what we need to have been doing all along. It's being more inclusive. I'm sure others would say completely the exact opposite, right? And that's what I
Right.
find so interesting about this, because there's almost like a yin and yang to that discussion. I see both as viable options, and I simply, from my standpoint, completely naive and not representative of a company of any kind, I'd be fascinated on what that discussion fleshes out as. Like, what's the right decision to make?
Yeah, I'm empathetic to their position as well because I dabble in some CRO work and I work with.
Yeah.
It's funny how as soon as I'm in CRO world
Mm.
and on the sponsor side, all the stuff I complain about doesn't really matter, and I'm
Yeah.
the same person.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, of course it makes sense to cap. I think there's should be a compromise because a Caucasian patient is still data.
I
I
know.
think that
I
what
know.
maybe they should like study, maybe I remember back in the day during the opioid crisis
Mm.
when a consortium of sponsors got together, not because they wanted to, but because I think it was the FDA mandated they do like long-term safety studies.
Yeah.
And so like eight opioid makers banded together and made a study. I actually forgot the name of it. And you could tell nobody wanted to do that study on the sponsor
Mm.
side, but it gave patients like it gave them like an out, like, hey, you can do this study.
Yeah.
I feel like they should have all these GLP-1 people, these are
Mm.
big,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there's a lot of people in this space should combine. Okay, we're gonna cap like Caucasian, but we should have like a off-roading for these sites that are doing these studies. Like if we do cap you for race-related
Yeah.
reasons, you have this study, which is like a lot easier, and
Yeah.
just put them in there. I feel like that would not be a waste of money either because
You're still gathering data.
you're
It would
gathering
basically be like
data.
almost single patient INDs, and some, not on that level, but basically you would be able to continue to gather data on like a line
Yeah.
extension
And
or
these are
something.
not like poor companies.
Mm.
These are not like we're not talking
Well,
about biotech struggling.
yeah, no, yeah,
These are money's not really an issue. Just takes a little less of those lobbying dollars and put it towards patient-centric stuff.
mm,
My opinion. I speak for myself too, clearly. I think I'm unemployable after starting Guru Nation. That's my thoughts on that.
right,
Diversity, yeah, and there was another angle I wanted to get to, but this last one kind of got me stuck on
yeah.
that idea.
No, I mean the topic kind of just organically came out in this discussion, so it makes sense.
I'll make a good
Clearly, it's
article.
clearly relevant.
Make a good article too.
Yeah.
Oh, here's what I was gonna say. Real life story. I love real life stories, anecdotes. In the
Hmm.
absence of data, anecdotes rule. And when I have data on
Yeah.
this stuff, it's brand new. A colleague of Chris and I we help site owners get started. We help sites get studies. In the context of this diversity, you know, plans and changes in the industry. We had a site owner that wanted to move to Idaho, and Chris told them the only issue with that, Idaho's like what 90% white.
Yeah.
It might be hard to get selected for trials in the face of the diversity
Mm.
action
Yeah.
plans and things like that. Border towns, great.
Yeah.
Places like Idaho and Montana, maybe not so great. It kind of sucks for sites that want to be in those areas.
Yeah.
Like you can't force minorities
No.
to fall out of the sky for your study.
No.
What do you think about sites wanting to open up or continue business in places like that are
Yeah.
not diverse?
So, it's actually kind of a really fascinating topic in the realm of, if you're asking reviewers, like health authority reviewers, or if you're asking like grant reviewers for catchment area coverage, it it's irrelevant in some respects what the actual demographics are. What's more relevant is that your patient population is being representative of whatever is being seen in the area that your business or your hospital is located in is. That's the nature of the beast. So if you're enrolling or you're providing care for that population, whether it be Commission on Cancer, any kind of hospital accreditation, et cetera, and you're providing care to the population that your business is placed in, according to the letter of the law and spirit of the law, you're doing your job. You're doing the job of behalf of that hospital or location because you're providing service. What's interesting is what you're bringing up is, what if your population simply just does not at this point in time look as, and this is a bad, not, it doesn't look as diverse as somewhere in like Atlanta, right? So man, that's a hard one. And I
I
and I
know.
and I would not, I don't know. I don't know if it's a level of, okay, what kind of business analysis you need to do as a site owner to determine, okay, is there enough opportunity and projected opportunity in this space from a market share perspective that I could conducively run a business, knowing my pool of resource when it comes to potential patient population. I don't know if that's a decision. It's a decision on the business owner's side to decide whether they feel comfortable enough to,
Yeah.
because it's like any business, right? I have good friends that run collectibles businesses, and they have to figure out where they submit, like where they open up shops, and it's all about location. And I would think the same thing for these research sites, where
Yeah.
a lot of it has to do with location. So you've done your risk, or you've done your business plan assessment, and this is what your kind of niche is, and this rolls into your overall business plan. And so taking that into account, I think is going to be important. And I don't know. I don't have the magic bullet answer on that one, Dan, because I
Yeah.
I will tell you that if we're taking a very data driven approach, you're right. We may not even not even purposely or willingly, when we're doing feasibility and competitive intelligence data that we do before we even go out the door for feasibility, we may be inadvertently skimming all of those off because we're running data to make the decision and we're not even taking into effect. But if we need something that hits X percentage, say potential patient population needs to have 25% X, Y, and Z, and you don't automatically, you may be being filtered out. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying it's a
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
And I don't know what you do with that. Yeah.
We don't either because it's new for us too, as far as advising sites. We told
Yeah.
them that, this is the risk. The
Mm,
benefit is where you're gonna move, there's no other sites. That's a
yeah.
good thing. But
Yeah.
maybe it's bad. Maybe they're not there for a reason
Yeah.
because either they can't keep the doors open or they just thought it through as well.
Yeah.
I see it's not quite there yet because from the studies I have, this is the only one that's really policing this hard like this.
Mm,
The other ones don't really care, and I think they don't care because they did the math beforehand and they said, well, we plan to get our
yeah.
diversity numbers from these sites anyways.
Yeah.
So we're gonna just focus on quality, but make sure that we do have sites in these diverse areas, which I think is the right way to do it because then you're not excluding
Correct.
people. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think it's okay to tell someone you can't join this study because you're white. I just don't think that's all right.
No, no. And that's why I mean there's also large ethical nuances there. But I got to tell you, I'm sure that there have been plenty minorities that have been told over the years you can't enroll. 'Cause there's got to be something. So it's a matter of, there's a process in play here that um
Yeah.
yeah, it's maybe it'll be interesting. And I'm sure you
Well, I
know
think minorities in the past self-excluded themselves. Like,
hmm,
we're not gonna do this. Did you see what happened in Tuskegee? Like, we're,
I know.
you know,
There's yeah,
we're far enough removed to where that's not a barrier anymore. Like, we have Yuma's not that high on African Americans. It is a military town, so we do have
yeah.
some that come through, and they never bring up Tuskegee or,
No,
like,
and there's some literature, interestingly enough, that does speak to that reality that you just mentioned, saying like it's been almost not a tactic, but an unintended tactic to hide, not hide, but leverage things like Tuskegee and other types of human subjects kind of issues or concerns, and kind of hide behind that as an excuse to not ask or not bring trials out to the community because, well, there's a
ah,
lot of bias. And now there's data, including data even coming out of Genentech, that with people like Quita Highsmith and others that are saying this is no longer the case. In fact, we have examples where we had fully prospectively planned, fully minority enrolled, like asthma or COVID trials. And it was very clear that African Americans do want to participate.
yeah,
In fact, so we can no longer say, oh, it's because they're worried about that. Like we need to just meet people where they're at, period. And there's a lot of stuff happening in this space where it's actually kind of like a microcosm of ethical research opportunity here in the realm of just investigational drug enrollment on studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like these sponsors that are unprepared, especially if they're overseas sponsors, maybe haven't thought this through. Like, not every city in the US is diverse. Like, yeah, the big ones are, but the little ones,
Yeah.
they skew on one extreme or the other for the most part. I feel like you need a pioneer. Like maybe we're entering the pioneer, like the Wild West era
Yeah.
of clinical research, where you have to go into uncharted territories. Like, let's go to more border towns
Yeah.
and let's invest. I've talked to a few big pharma around COVID where they wanted to invest in our PI Academy. We have a
Yeah.
PI, a site owner academy. Like, hey, we're interested in this. How do we help
Yeah.
bring, like, we're willing to invest in those communities if we can use those sites at some point. And I know other
Correct.
sponsors going to benefit. That's fine. But we kind of know where they're at. We get first dibs in a way.
Mhm.
I feel like you need to do that, and not enough sponsors are doing that. Like, not enough sponsors are taking it. And I know it's not their core competency, but
Yeah.
there are plenty of groups out there that are willing to partner Latinos in clinical research, Black women in
Mhm.
clinical research, our site owner academy. I mean, it's kind of made for going, like being a pioneer, going to uncharted territory where it's going to be diverse,
Mhm.
but it's going to take 2, 3 years to get a competent staff and infrastructure and all that. So I
Yeah.
don't know if sponsors are actually talking about this stuff. You work for one. I
We
don't know if
are.
that's
We
there.
are. And then and there are efforts. I think it comes down to honestly in a lot of respects here, it comes down to figuring out how to compliantly financially support these efforts
Mm.
without inverse consequences of being viewed as
Kickbacks.
inducive, coercive. So it's just as much as a lot of people are like, oh, well, the sponsors have all the money. If the sponsors don't very highly relegate and regulate how they're using that money, and some of these things I don't know how we compliantly do it. I think we have very creative individuals that have very wise strategies behind how we can financially support things like building out more naive, quote unquote, naive clinical trial centers or private practices and leverage these companies that you're mentioning that could provide advanced boot camp training, et cetera, these kind of things. It absolutely is going to become the norm, especially in the US with this work, because the majority of patients are seen in the community setting. So yeah, especially for later phase studies, like that's something that clearly is
Good point.
uh, more applicable to later phase because you need thousands of patients, hundreds of sites. So you're by nature going into a much broader population. You need to go to the community practices. That's where you're seeing a lot of that now energy happening. And it's an interesting time. And I think it has more to do with figuring out how, from a compliance perspective, how sponsors can fund those types of activities because they are clearly interested in it.
Mhm.
And it's not out of full only business need. Like there is a level here where we're saying, so long as one site's trained, that's good. It's good for overall access for the patients, regardless, period, whether it be sponsor X, Y, and Z or biotech X, Y, and Z who helped fund that activity. At the end of the day, if it means you have an additional site and an additional PI, we're all better off for it. However, that sounds super altruistic, and you and I both know that that's also not the reality of a lot of what happens, right? So there's a level of commitment here, and I do see partner companies, sister companies, competitors, our company, especially in our later phase divisions, we are starting to work in those areas and provide, and select vendors to help us do those kind of things and accomplish those things. But it's right now it's all tethered to one study or one molecule, and that's part of the problem because it has to be right now because of the concern about compliance or overall inducement. Like, oh, well, Genentech supported the creation of 5 new border town clinical research sites. And then it comes out in the New York Times that, well, we're now trying to create our own patient population and take over and undercut the doctors. Like there's a lot of things here
I
that can
see.
be construed and skewed in ways that are unintended. So I think it has a lot to do with figuring out how to compliantly fund it. It's happening. I will say that. I'm not directly involved, so I can't speak on how the contracting looks, but it's becoming more and more relevant, especially in your kind of later phase drug settings. Not necessarily phase one because you're going to gravitate towards AMCs, things of that nature, but way more relevant right now, at least in the US, for your later phase kind of registration trials. And we need more investigators, we need more sites.
I
That's in
see.
general, in general.
Well, thank you for sharing that because it's good to have small sites,
Yeah.
small entrepreneurs, small businesses think very differently than
Yeah.
large pharma. And
Yeah.
we often kind of see the same thing. It's just a matter of the unintended consequences. For us, it's resources. Like, we don't have money, we can't print, we don't have access to just unlimited
Yeah. Yeah.
resources. And with big pharma, it's more like, hey, we don't want, there's a lot of lawyers out there. Just one fraud pod episode with Darshan will scare you shitless. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. I
Yeah.
think I understand. I took notes actually for our site owner academy to see how we could position the messaging better for
Yeah.
some of the big pharma because we had some talks and then things kind of fell apart during COVID, and
Yeah.
ever since then I feel like it's been a chaos,
Agreed.
a
No, I mean,
mad
you're worried
mad
about getting
scramble.
your staff back up, let alone creating new work location. Yeah. No, I hear you.
But the appetite's there, man. I mean,
I think it's a reality. It's not even just an appetite, Dan. It's a need. And when you have a need, then you will have people that will financially support that. Yeah.
so we are bringing back the site owner academy for that reason.
Mhm.
We still are targeting like individual
Yeah.
physicians or entrepreneurs, but the real goal is to just like these patient recruitment portals, like sure we'll sell it to sites. The real goal is to have a Genentech pay for it for as a central campaign.
Hmm.
That's not only the real money, but we
Yeah.
can maximize economies of scale better and just rather than service like all these decentralized sites, and cost us double, triple,
Hmm.
we can just
Hmm.
service one vendor, one customer, and it makes it a lot easier. So same thing with the site owner academy. I think the ultimate goal is to get that
Yeah.
paid for by some sponsors.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'll send that little short to the team and say, keep working, guys.
Yeah.
Monica, Ashley, Judy, Chris, and now Darshan, who's on there.
All
And
right.
Darshan's roles to scare the shit out of everybody too. He's the compliance guy.
Okay.
We're the gas, he's the brake
You
pedal.
always need a break.
Yeah, try driving without a brake.
I
It's not a
know.
good idea.
No. No.
A lot of small businesses do that though.
Yeah. Well,
Dan,
it's
this
good
is
to
like
good to good to see you.
excellent
Thank you.
discussion, man. I mean, I know you wanted to get into some of the community-based clinics
Yeah,
and
but if when a discussion kind of flows, I'd like to go in that direction anyway. So I don't know about you, but I think this was kind of not as planned as I expected to
right.
go. But I feel like it's also hopefully is kind of relevant and I don't know
Well, we
time.
did discuss it all comes back to community-based practice, I think, when
Yeah,
it
you're
comes
right.
to diversity.
Because exactly. So I
We
mean,
just didn't get into long-term storage rules because we spent a long time talking about screen fill caps.
and we should at some point, if you ever have me back,
No, of course.
we should talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in more of the non-onc space for later phase trial opportunities and these larger kind of opportunities being even brought to these site networks or private practice kind of nuances. Like, are those opportunities even coming up? Because I'd just be interested from the site perspective. And then also talk a little bit more about, at least in the oncology space, maybe it's maybe more applicable in the oncology space right now, because you have larger hospitals buying up smaller kind of private practices, and then they become subsumed and doing research at those locations that were bought up. Like, how does that look and how do we do that? Because it's been going on for decades, but I don't know if we've really cracked that egg yet. But again, that's a little bit more onc specific. But what would be fascinating is there any kind of indirect correlated group within the non-onc space that you could say, Dan, I also see this in respiratory, or I also see this in GI. So it would be a fascinating topic. So we already have
Yeah,
more ideas to talk about if you're interested.
plenty. Yeah, well,
All
no,
right.
Dan, it's a pleasure getting you on.
Yeah.
I know you
Thank
gotta go. Thank you for your time. Guru Nation, go, everybody go connect with Dan right now. His LinkedIn is underneath. Reach
you. All
out
right.
to him. Like,
Thank
subscribe,
you.
comment, share. Thank you so much, Dan.
Have a good day.